Hello from New York, I'm Chris Hayes. With me today, I have Van Jones from Rebuild the Dream, Robert Wolf, a fundraiser for the Obama campaign, and former president of the UBS Investment Bank, Neera Tanden from the Center for American Progress, and John Nichols, my colleague at The Nation magazine. We're talking about finance, Wall Street, and the Democratic Party, and this election, particularly their relationship to the president, his re-election campaign, and the raft of stories we've seen about the ways in which the titans of finance have soured on the president. And as I said at the top of the show, nothing makes me love Barack Obama more than that. Here's Jamie Dimon, of course, of JP Morgan Chase, on Meet the Press, describing his own political affiliation in the wake of the president's first term.
You supported President Obama. You're a Democrat still?
I would call myself a barely Democrat at this point, and I didn't support anyone last time around. I'm the New York Fed board. I'm not allowed to, but I am a Democrat, yes.
Well, so what happened? Why barely a Democrat now?
I've gotten disturbed at some of the Democrats' behavior, anti-business behavior, the sentiment, the attacks on work ethic and successful people. And I think it's very counterproductive.
Attacks on work ethic. Can someone please say to me when President Obama has attacked the work ethic? How do you respond to that Jamie Dimon quote? I'm letting you play the straight man. I'm the one getting all upset, so you can...
Listen, I have a lot of respect for Jamie, so how he wants to frame where he is personally, that's up to him. The way I would see it is we have had 30 straight gains in private sector jobs, over 4.5 million private sector jobs. So I think the private sector is starting to actually build a nice foundation. Housing, foreclosures is at a 4-year low. Housing starts at a 4-year high. The auto sector, and something we should just bring up, when the governor of Ohio the other night said that they have gone from 48th to 4 in job creation.
Yeah, this is great.
And 1 in every 8 jobs is the auto sector.
Right.
It should end with, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I mean, so I think, listen, we're seeing our country make things in America, build things in America, export from America. Those are good things.
But I'm sorry, I just want you to...
On the Jamie thing, I mean, listen...
But that specific thing, I don't need to forget about Jamie Dimon. I'm just saying this idea that you hear this a lot. I've heard it in interviews I've done in my own reporting, talking to folks on Wall Street and hedge funds, whatever. Attacks on success, attacks on the work ethic. This idea that Barack Obama has some secret socialist program to sap the entrepreneurial dynamic verve of the American people.
I don't buy it because, listen, I hear... as I said before, the Republicans can put out Donald Trump and have their talk, but I'm proud that Obama has people like Warren Buffett, Jim Sinegal of Costco, Eric Schmidt of Google. Maybe we're just not touting who is for him on the business side as much as we should. Maybe we just don't yell as much. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of business people for the president. There's a lot of business people for Governor Romney. That's where this country is. Wall Street does not define business.
And I think that's a very important thing as well. We were talking about this at the break. Wall Street is a part of the business community. You have a lot of people in the business community who understand that turning the country over to Wall Street has devastated Main Street businesses. And so it's not. And so you hear this sort of the screaming. Yeah, I don't understand how Wall Street got away with such a small slap on the wrist. They got the bailouts, they got the bonuses, they got all the great stuff, and they literally are crying because he used the word fat cat once. And when you ask them, what is it you would have him do differently? It's an emotional thing, but they're putting their kind of emotional pain over the rest of the country's need for economic gain.
Listen, I think it's nice to point the finger at Wall Street, them doing this, them doing that. I mean, Wall Street, you guys are defining Wall Street much more broader than how I define Wall Street. Has done a lot of great things for this country. Sure. They're very philanthropic, okay? You cannot blame Wall Street because TARP helped them and we sped to recovery more quickly. It's a positive that our banks are firm today. Okay, we have economic stability. We are the most stable industrialized country in the world. Okay, because the banks are stable. That's a good thing. We should not move away from that.
Could we just go on this issue of success for a second and the president's rhetoric? Because if you listen to the Republicans last week, there was a lot of argument that somehow the president is attacking success. And I think what's really happened here is if you look at what happened in 2008 in Wall Street and housing and a whole variety of areas, there was a crisis and people lost a lot of their wealth, 30% of the wealth of the country.
$8 trillion.
$8 trillion. And, a lot of people made bad decisions. A lot of people on Wall Street made some bad decisions. A lot of people in the government made some bad decisions with allowing a deregulation system that you referenced earlier. But I think, the president has just spoken to that level of anger in the country, that people who did nothing wrong lost their jobs, lost income, lost their housing value. People are angry about that. And, what the Republicans have done is conflate that criticism the president's made about these poor decisions in the past with an attack on success. And that is a failure. And we need to call them out on that. We've not attacked success. We've attacked the unfairness that has come from an economy that isn't working for everybody.
At the Republican National Convention, the watchword on the T-shirts, even before the speeches, but in every speech, was the "we built it" thing.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize, that is at the heart of this thing. There is a desire to suggest that Barack Obama, because of in one speech, which he actually explained exactly what he was saying about infrastructure, and that Barack Obama is somehow a militant foe of the person, not Wall Street, but the scrappy guy trying to start a business. And what scares me about this discourse is that desire to kind of come back at that and try and explain that goes deep into the weeds of where they want to be. A debate about whether Barack Obama is anti-business or not. That's what they want. And I think the answer on this one is to go so much of what you've been talking about here, but also to point out one thing. The magazines that Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney read, the newspapers they read, the Financial Times, The Economist, they keep talking about the American success story of the last 3 years. They keep saying European countries tried austerity. That really didn't work. In America, this Obama guy, he did stimulus. That worked. Right. And so I think it's important to point out that there has been some success here. And that's a way to counter the "you didn't build it" stuff in that.
Two things. One, the "we didn't build it" completely taken out of context.
Totally.
We should be clear. Yeah. This is a guy and the President of the United States who believes in infrastructure as one of the growth engines for this country. We should also be very clear. For every dollar spent, it's a multiplier of 1.6 times on GDP. The fastest multiplier there is for any business.
Absolutely.
He put out a bill, and there was even a bipartisan bill, Kerry Hutchinson, that didn't get passed. How can you not pass infrastructure? I hosted a summit that had the Chamber of Commerce on one side, the unions, Rich Trump on the other side,
both begging
in the middle, and the regulation in Texas. They were all for it.
Begging
so
for it.
The idea that we just have a polarizing environment today, we have to get back to.
We've got a polarizing Washington. We don't necessarily have a polarizing.
But this, I think this is one of the great tragedies, is that there is common ground. There's common ground between business, there's common ground between labor, and it has to do with investing in infrastructure and human capital. But there has been an absolute desire on the part of Republicans to see nothing go forward, even stuff that's good for small businesses,
they supported
even stuff that's good for infrastructure. The Republicans won't pass their own bills because they would rather see the economic pain build up than to actually have the country move forward and have Obama get credit for it. And I think that has to be raised as a question of real treachery. You can't have an economic emergency. Think about the environmental emergency we had with the hurricane. Everybody jumps in to help. You have an economic emergency. The president jumps in to help, and the Republicans don't jump in to help him. That's a big problem.
A year ago today, he came out with the America's Jobs Act.
And that should have brought us together just like that. It was mostly Republican ideas.
70% of that was tax breaks. Well, 30%
including for
was
small
infrastructure.
business.
So argue about the 10% that no one's for.
How can protecting the domestic auto industry not be the same sort of thing? I mean, these are fundamental things.
The first economist to come out that this is good policy was Mark Zandi.
There you go.
McCain's Republican economist who said 1.7 million jobs, 1.7, and maybe 2% on GDP.
And it went nowhere in the House. The House Republicans.
And
that was Paul Ryan.
But explain, because that to me is also interesting, because why is it the case, Neera, you articulated this idea that it should be the case that a better recovery is better for all those folks. We're talking about return on investment, right? All those folks who are giving tons of money to Mitt Romney. It should be the case that you need customers. Even if you're a bank, you need customers, although sometimes not so much, depending on what kind of bank you run. But generally, the folks that are giving all this money to Mitt Romney, you would think there would be pressure brought to bear on the Republican Party not to do that, precisely because a recovery would be broadly helpful. And I think the problem here, and it gets back, and I don't want to litigate the Wall Street financial crisis. I have a million shows to do that. But the problem here, right, is that there's a bifurcated recovery. And this gets to this profound point, is that it is increasingly the case that those folks that are giving money to Mitt Romney feel that obstruction on the front of jobs and the recovery, that they can achieve a new equilibrium in which we have 8% unemployment and high profits, in which banks are making money and people are out of work, and that is a durable equilibrium into the future. So those 1.7 million jobs that are on the table when the president comes forward with the American Jobs Act, they can write that off because they're still going to their quarterly profits are breaking records. And the question is, are they right or are they wrong? Because if they're right, that's a serious and deep and profound political problem for the political coalition of the Democrats and for the American political economy down the road. And with that, Robert Wolf, former president of UBS. I'm sorry, I'm not going to let you respond, but I'll be back on the program to do it.
All right.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Some of the less talked about political races this season could have more of an impact than who wins the White House. Coming up next. Presidential election year, it's easy to overlook the down ballot races, even as they move into their final stages. But these races matter more and more as control of Congress becomes more fluid and contested. Especially on domestic issues, the future of this country may be shaped more by who wins Congress this November than by who wins the White House. With the exception of a few brief interregnums, the Democrats controlled both houses of Congress for nearly the entire latter half of the 20th century. Then came the so-called Republican Revolution in 1994 that turned Capitol Hill upside down, the Democratic sweep in 2006 that seized control of the House back, and the Tea Party backlash of 2010 that gave President Obama the most obstructive and implacable congressional opposition in generations, the nature of which took a while to sink in the Oval Office. President Obama said, "I think there are many times in my first couple of years when I kept on sitting there trying to see if we can negotiate some sort of compromise, and there was just a lot of refusal on the other side's part to compromise." As the last 2 years have illustrated, the parliamentary discipline and maximalism of the modern Republican Party makes congressional control arguably more important than ever. So with the Democratic Party convening this week, we wanted to hear directly from some of the Democratic candidates in House and Senate races, because these are the people who hear directly from the voters, which is the reason why we've invited 5 down-ballot candidates to join us this morning. Here with me at the table is Rob Zerban, Paul Ryan's Democratic challenger for the 1st Congressional District in Wisconsin, Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic candidate for New York's 8th Congressional District, Cynthia Dill, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senator from Maine, Nate Shinagawa, Democratic candidate from New York's 23rd Congressional District, and joining us from Phoenix is Kyrsten Sinema, a Democratic candidate for Arizona's new 9th Congressional District. It is great to have you all here.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
I want to start out talking about the role that incumbency plays, and this is especially true for 2 of you. Rob, you're running against an incumbent whose name is now familiar to America, Paul Ryan. Nate, you're also running against an incumbent, one-term incumbent, John Reed.
Tom Reed.
Tom Reed, sorry. Former mayor of Corning, right? A
That's
Republican.
right. Yeah.
And the district has been redrawn. He's not in exactly the same district as
That's
before.
Right.
For both of you running against incumbents, the dynamic of this election so far has been about the economy, the Republicans making the case the economy is bad, it's Barack Obama's fault, vote Barack Obama out. But of course, we have divided government, and Congress has been, playing quite a role in the economy. Look at the debt ceiling fracas a year ago. How does that play in your district? I mean, are you making a case about the economy and tying it to the incumbent? Is that part of what the conversation is?
Absolutely. In the 1st Congressional District, since Paul Ryan's been our congressman, we've had a mass exodus of jobs. We had a GM plant close in Janesville, which we heard about. We heard about and his misrepresentation of the facts. And then we also had a Chrysler plant close in Kenosha, where I'm from. And so that right there combined is over 12,000 jobs that we've lost since he's been our congressman. So yes, I'm pointing this out to people, and I think that due to his speech and the outrage that was generated among the people and former UAW members in Janesville, it is front and center.
That's interesting. Has there been a lot of local backlash to that line in the speech?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, because people are looking, they look at this and they say he either blatantly lied or he didn't know the facts, which, as your congressman, that is unacceptable.
We were looking at there's an amazing and sort of heartbreaking slideshow the last day of SUV production of that plant, December 23rd, I believe, 2008, and pictures and signed signatures. And Nate.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I think that, well, this Congress has been totally obstructionist. And, you've had that jobs bill on the table that was just discussed, for a year and no action actually taking place. My district is very much like Rob's. We have a lot of manufacturing, a lot of agriculture, a lot of major decisions that need to be made this Congress that haven't been made. I'm running against an incumbent, Tom Reed, who was recently in the Sea of Galilee scandal as well. And it's an instance where
scandal is a little strong.
It's a scandal, yeah, true. All right. But he was part of it, and when he was part of it, it just showed that he was part of that culture in Washington. He went in there. This whole Tea Party movement went in there to change Washington, and they ended up becoming part of the problem, right? And he's still taking taxpayer-funded trips all the way overseas, right? And not just taxpayer-funded trips, but also trips paid for by lobbyists and special interests, right? And so he's become part of the problem. I think what voters are concerned about is that this status quo means that fairness doesn't pay off in this country. And there isn't fairness in this country. And so working and middle class people feel like they're being left behind. And that status quo that this Tea Party Congress is a part of, they're continuing that.
Okay, so we talked about the American Jobs Act and some of the job losses in the district. Cynthia, you're running in Maine. Hakeem, you're here in New York. And Kirsten, you're in Arizona. And I was thinking about this conversation. I was remembering back in 2006, the Democrats very successfully nationalized that election. A lot of it was around the Iraq War and opposition to the Iraq War and a feeling of exhaustion. Let's say everyone at this table wins, and we have a Democratic majorities in both houses. What's the agenda, Kirsten? What do you when you say to the folks in your district, I'm going to go to Congress, and if you put Democrats in charge, we will do what's the fill in the blank there?
Well, Chris, when we're walking and talking with voters in our district, what we say is the only way to change Washington is to change the people we send there. Because unfortunately, from Arizona, we've been sending a delegation that's more interested in partisan bickering than in actually solving problems. And I'll tell you, Chris, voters are concerned about one thing and one thing only in Arizona: jobs. 1/3 of Arizonans are worried that they could lose their jobs sometime this year. So they wake up in the morning and they don't really think about being a Democrat or being a Republican. They think about whether or not they're going to have their job, whether or not they can pay their mortgage, whether they can put their kids through school, and whether they'll have a safe and strong economic future. That's what they care about.
But when you're talking about that economic insecurity, right, the national election's happening at the same time. And when you're talking about economic insecurity, the argument that the opposition party is making is that it's the fault of the person at the top of the ticket, Barack Obama. I want to hear how you respond to that. I also want to hear what's surprising you that you're hearing from voters, because you guys are in touch with them, right after we take a quick break. Talking to Democratic congressional and Senate candidates, Cynthia, how do you respond to the fact that voters are feeling economically insecure and you're campaigning to go to Washington and help change that? At the same time, Republicans' message about the source of that economic insecurity is very straightforward. It's Barack Obama. What is your message to them?
My message is that the Republicans are wrong. It's not Barack Obama that's obstructing the ability for Americans to get jobs. It's the extremists in the Republican Party who've made it their life's work to prevent any success on the part of the president and Democrats. And so what I tell voters is there are these packages up on the shelf, bills waiting to be passed that could provide a veterans job corps, that could provide tax fairness, that could help the refinancing of homes, that could build infrastructure projects. These things are just waiting to happen, but we need the votes. And so they need to send people like me, people like the fine candidates at this table, so that the president can have the support in the Congress he needs to move the country forward.
Do people know about those bills? I mean, I feel like do people know when you tell a voter there's a thing called the American Jobs Act that would do X, Y, and Z? What is the response? I mean, do they know in your district that exists?
Well, people may not know the specifics, but what they do know is that this Republican leadership in the House of Representatives and that Tea Party conference has blocked the ability of the president and the American people to move forward in a productive way. Now, notwithstanding the tremendous obstructionism that we've seen, that's evident to the people on the ground that I talk to day after day after day, what we've been pointing out is that progress, notwithstanding the obstructionism, has been made, that 4.3 million private sector jobs have been created under this administration, that the automobile industry in Detroit was saved to the good of the country, that we have seen foreclosure rates, at a 4-year low. So progress has been made, notwithstanding the obstructionism, but of course more needs to be done The president inherited a tremendous train wreck of catastrophic proportions. The only way to get it back on track is to make sure that we send people who are committed to doing the business of the people. The Democratic Party is that.
Yeah. One of the things that I found interesting in my district is that people are concerned about public sector job loss as much as they are private sector job loss. And they see Republicans very much part of that problem. Because what's happened is that you look at school districts in my district. I have Elmira, the city of Elmira. It's only a city of 30,000 people, 200 job losses in just teachers alone. And that's hurting these communities, and it's hurting people across this entire district. And so, when we're losing those public sector jobs, we're losing middle class jobs. And that's a huge problem. And I think people see Republicans at fault for that.
If you're talking about obstruction, that's part of the case. Kirsten, I'm curious because you are in a district that is, if I'm not mistaken, a new district, and my understanding of its political dimensions is that it's a real 50-50 kind of district, and you're one of the number 2 ranked swing districts in terms of how close the electorate is. Can you, in that environment, when you just said to me, we need to send people who want to solve problems and not bicker, can you simultaneously say, I'm going to work to solve problems, and there's this implacable, nihilistic, obstructionist party on the other side that will do nothing, will stop at nothing to destroy the Democratic Party?
Well, Chris, I just served 7 years in the Arizona State Legislature. Really, if I can manage that, I can certainly handle Congress. The truth is that there are opportunities to work across the aisle. The problem that we faced in Congress is that there are so many extremists who are just like my new Tea Party opponent, who are more interested in partisan gridlock than in finding shared solutions. Chris, I've got an opponent who wants to eliminate the Department of Education, right? No Pell Grants, no student loans, no funding for K-12 schools. It's hard to find common ground with those individuals. But I believe that you can always find a way to reach across the aisle and solve some problems. What we need is a Congress that has folks on both sides of the aisle that are willing to do just that.
Rob. Yeah, Chris, I was a small business owner. I was somebody who employed 45 people, providing excellent wages and benefits. And I can tell you that there's not this overregulation of small businesses that people on the Republican side like to talk about. My businesses were located in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and in one of the states they call a nanny state for being overregulated and try to demonize it. But I had a lot of success. The greatest impediment I found to my business was not having a holistic solution to the healthcare crisis our nation faced. And the Republicans' response to addressing that was to do nothing. Now we have a president who gets in and passes the ACA, and this is going to do a lot to help people get started in business.
How does the Affordable Care Act play in your district? Do you talk about it much? What do you hear from voters about it?
Well, it comes up quite a bit because, with Paul Ryan having written this Kill Medicare budget, I think the solution is Medicare for all, and that's how we get the small business of entrepreneurship going again. That's how we support our small businesses, by making an environment where they're not worried about having to pay horrendous amounts in health insurance costs or not have the kind of protection for their family that they need for fear of bankruptcy.
Do we have a Medicare for all consensus at the table? Are we
I'm in.
For all, Medicare for all?
Certainly the case. And I think,
wow, okay.
No, I think the Affordable Care Act and its passage fits into this broader thematic war that's playing out with progress for the many, which I think everyone around the table is articulating, and prosperity for the few. And the notion is that you have these entitlement programs that have been successful, Medicare, Social Security, that are under intense attack by the Republican Party, by Mitt Romney, by Paul Ryan, by the extremists on the right, that really threaten, the capacity for average, ordinary, everyday Americans to move forward. And that really is the stakes of this election, and I think that the more that we can emphasize that in our own districts and across the country, the better we'll be in November.
I think it's even more than...
The Affordable Care Act, you asked about how it plays out in the various races. In Maine, the first thing that our Tea Party governor did when the Supreme Court announced that the Affordable Care Act was constitutional, but the Medicaid the waiver issue might be out there, was try to throw people off of health insurance, like 27,000 people. It's just, so the Affordable Care Act comes up over and over again when you're in a state that's being governed by Tea Parties, because their goal is to take as many people off of health care as possible. And so it's a great opportunity for progressives and Democrats to talk about it.
We've now heard the word Tea Party, the phrase Tea Party 15 times, which suggests something about the polling on that phrase. I want to talk about the era of big money and super PACs and how that's playing in your races. We're hearing a lot about it at the top right after this.
For Senate, Angus King or Cynthia Dill. Both are reliable Obama allies on health care and taxes, but there are differences. Cynthia Dill is pro-labor and supports raising the minimum wage. Angus King vetoed it. Dill is known as a bold progressive and a champion of marriage equality and stronger gun laws. Cynthia Dill, a Democrat you can feel good about.
We're running an ad that was run for you, Cynthia Dill, because it points to a fascinating set of circumstances. Specifically in Maine, you're the Democratic nominee, there's a Republican nominee, and then there is an independent running by a man named Angus King, very well-known in the state, two-term governor, had hosted a talk show, I think, at some point, a television show. Very well-known, high levels of name recognition, has polled quite highly in the early polls, although you've told me that those are old polls. And this was a super PAC ad taken out by whom on your behalf?
It's a Republican super PAC by the name of Freedom Works. And while it's unusual in a lot of respects, it's also erroneous in one regard, and that is that Angus King supports extending Bush tax cuts for everybody. So he's on the side of the Republicans when it comes to tax fairness. I support the president's view that we should extend tax cuts only for families making less than $250,000. But the ad itself is certainly a phenomenon in politics, at least in my lifetime. I've never seen the Republicans do something to help me like they did in this ad. And I understand from news reports that today a new ad is going to be rolling out from the same Republican super PAC. So I haven't seen it, but hopefully it talks about my great legislative record.
Well, and this is a fairly cynical attempt to essentially get Democrats to split the vote of Democrats between Angus King and yourself, paving the way for a path to victory for the Republican opponent, Charlie Summers.
Right. I mean, there's nothing really good to say about the Republican candidate. So what they're trying to do is repeat
what happened with the governor's race.
In the governor's race, which is absolutely impossible given the circumstances.
Kirsten, are you seeing there's going to be a lot of money on both sides? The national committees are going to probably spend a lot of money in that district. You're on the red to blue list. Are you seeing super PAC money or dark money from the 501c4s, groups like Freedom Works or Crossroads? Is that a specter that looms in your race?
Well, we're not sure what's going to happen in the general election in this race, but I can tell you, Chris, I just went through a very hard-fought primary. There was a super PAC against me in the primary. It was a shadowy group from Tennessee. We don't know where the money came from. We have no information about it, but we do expect that to play again. And as you mentioned, Chris, I'm on the red to blue list, which the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has listed 50 seats across the country as their top priority to switch from Republican to Democrat, or in my case, a brand new district that is pretty evenly split between Democrats, independents, and Republicans. So we do expect to see the specter of secret outside money in this race. From our perspective, we think it's even more important that we do a good job of defining ourselves and the folks that we serve early on in the race so that people aren't swayed by some of this shady.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are you seeing that kind of money, Nate?
Well, absolutely. Well, in my district, one of the big issues is fracking, natural gas fracking, high volume, hydraulic, slick water, horizontal fracking. And this stuff is, it has a big risk to our water in the area. Congressman Reed's the co-chair of the Marcellus Gas Shale Caucus. The American Petroleum Institute is already sending mailers into the district. Other oil and gas industry PACs and super PACs are contributing to this race. And so I'm definitely seeing it already. But also, I want to mention that even before this Citizens United era, the influence of money in politics is there. I mean, my opponent, I've raised $500,000 already from mostly individuals. My opponents have raised $790,000 from corporate political action committees.
Right.
And that influence of money is a huge problem.
PACs
absolutely.
that
So that's why, we need to absolutely be pushing, especially as progressives here too, for public financing of elections so we get the money out of politics and actually get democracy in the hands of middle class people.
How much time, give me an estimate, of your time spent waking and working, I'm going to go around the table, do you spend raising money? Be honest.
75%.
Well,
you're in a bit of a different situation.
It's a different situation, but we raised over $1 million in a heated primary that was necessary in order to get our message out. These congressional districts have grown, 717,000 people in size now. The cost of media in order to be able to broadcast your message out.
How much time are you
I'd say greater than 50%.
We spend about 25 hours a week in call time, and the rest of the time out meeting voters. And so.
Yeah, I spend about 25 hours a week, too. And actually, I have a big rural district. And so when the places where I can't get cell service, I relish the lack of cell service.
Because there's no. And Kirsten, how about you?
You know, I spend a lot of time fundraising. The good news about Arizona is that the majority of my donors come from within the district. So I get to spend a lot of time talking to voters about what they care about and garnering support for our grassroots campaign at the same time. But I'll tell you, it's expensive. We spend almost $1 million in our primary. We have to do that same amount again in the general.
I will tell any viewer that's watching, when you hear call time, which may sound like an innocuous phrase, it's a soul-sucking, destroying enterprise of sitting in some fluorescent back room with a telephone and a printed-out sheet of papers and probably a staffer being like, get on the phones, as you call through and ask people for money. I've watched people do it, and if you ever thought that you really thought running for office is going to be a glamorous enterprise, you should go watch someone do call time. More on what those dynamics look like after this break. All right, candidate forum, lightning round, Democratic challengers, and in some cases not challengers running for Congress. I want you to tell me one thing you would change about Washington. Rob Zerban.
I think we need to get rid of the out-of-touch Washington insiders like my opponent, Paul Ryan, who's never worked outside of Washington, D.C., never had a job in the private industry. And I think we need to change the culture. We need to get rid of those type of people.
You need to put into place a job creator, which is, as I understand, the entire argument of the RNC, which seems to be would seem to necessitate, if you follow the logic of vote for Rob Zerban over Paul Ryan. Hakeem Jeffries.
I think we've got to end the permanent campaign. You know, there's a time for politics, but once the campaign's in, we've got to get about the business of the American people. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is that the campaign continued when it was supposed to be time to govern. And hopefully, coming out of the November election, we can all get back to turning the economy around. Whatever the outcome is, I certainly think that the president will be reelected. We'll take the House back in Congress, and we can move forward.
Cynthia?
We need more progressive women in the Congress, and we need people who are going to stand up for working families and small businesses. I mean, that's what we need for the country to really move forward in a way that's productive and healthy and can bring prosperity to families.
One thing you would change about Washington?
I would absolutely bring back fairness to all the policies that we have out there. You know, instead of having a Ryan plan that attacks women, that attacks children's health, that attacks education, instead we need to have a budget that focuses on middle-class people and have the Democrats push it out there and actually invest in a 21st century economy, in infrastructure, an education system, and make sure the rich pay their fair share in taxes in order to do it.
Did your opponent vote for the Ryan budget?
Yes, he did, twice.
And your opponent wrote the Ryan budget. Kirsten, you get the last word on what you would change about Washington.
Well, what we need in Washington are more people who are focused on common sense, pragmatic solutions, and fewer people who are interested in partisan bickering and gridlock. That's a pretty simple thing to achieve. Just elect different people. People who have a proven track record of standing up for middle-class families and who are interested in solving problems.
If only gridlock could be dissolved unilaterally, which it cannot be. Kirsten Sinema, congressional candidate in Arizona. Rob Zerban, running for Paul Ryan's seat in Wisconsin. New York congressional candidate Hakeem Jeffries, U.S. Senate candidate Cynthia Dill from Maine, and Nate Shinagawa, also running for Congress in New York. It was really a great pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on.
What you should know for the news week ahead, coming up next. Just a moment, what we should know for the news week ahead. But first, a quick update on a subject we follow on this program. After months of pleading from economists across the political spectrum and cable news hosts such as myself, Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke on Friday hinted forcefully at further easing from the Fed. Bernanke called the job market a, quote, grave concern and argued that despite already low interest rates, there's more the Fed can do to combat unemployment. He cited research showing that 2 rounds of so-called quantitative easing have been successful, creating as many as 2 million jobs, prompting the question why, with over 12 million people unemployed and inflation at near record lows, the Fed hasn't done more. So what should you know for the week coming up? You should know that while the professional fact-checkers look forward to running this week's Democratic convention through their truth-o-meters, one of our viewers, Daniel Brook, dug up another misstatement in Mitt Romney's speech.
Everywhere I go in America, there are monuments that list those who have given their lives for America. There's no mention of their race, their party affiliation, or what they did for a living.
In fact, Brook points out that there's a World War I memorial near his house in New Orleans' 9th Ward that lists servicemen by race. You should know that one lists, quote, white men in active service, and the plaque next to it lists, quote, colored men who died in service. You should know that you too can fact check Romney by sending pictures of U.S. war memorials that do mention race, party affiliation, or what they did for a living to our Twitter account or at UpWithChris, or email them at upwithchris@msnbc.com. We'll post the best on our website, up.msnbc.com. You should know that when the Democratic delegates meet at the convention to update the party platform, they will have to decide whether to tweak the section that denounces the Bush administration's understanding of executive power. The 2008 platform says, quote, "We will not ship away prisoners in the dead of night to be tortured in far-off countries or detained without trial or charge prisoners who can and should be brought to justice for their crimes, or maintain a network of secret prisons to jail people beyond the reach of the law." You should know that under executive orders issued by the Obama administration, the CIA can still carry out rendition of prisoners, which was condemned by the European Parliament as, quote, "illegal instrument used by the United States." You should know that President Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act, whose statutory language preserves the possibility of worldwide indefinite detention. And you should know that a secret prison system in Afghanistan has been exempted from the Freedom of Information Act, although journalist Anand Gopal was able to get an inside look on the ground there. You should also know that in the mother of all pre-holiday weekend news dumps, last week Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the Justice Department will close its investigation into the CIA's torture and abuse of detainees without bringing any charges. The ACLU responded, quote, "Continuing impunity threatens to undermine the universally recognized prohibition on torture and other abusive treatments and sends a dangerous signal to government officials. There will be no consequences for their use of torture and other cruelty. Today's decision not to file charges against individuals who tortured prisoners to death is yet another entry in what is already a shameful record." And finally, as you barbecue tomorrow on Labor Day, you should know the holiday isn't just a way to recognize the end of summer, but that it was made a federal holiday in 1894, just 6 days after President Cleveland sent 12,000 troops to break the Pullman strike, firing on and killing some protesters. You should know that for all the celebration of bosses at the RNC, no one mentioned the small, inconvenient fact that businesses aren't just built by their owners. No small business founder and owner, no matter how visionary, can function without workers. And the same goes for the largest corporations in the world. Tomorrow is a good opportunity to survey the vast landscape of American civilization, from our roads and bridges to the cars that travel upon them, to the new gleaming skyscraper now stretching up into the air over Ground Zero. And remember, labor built that. I want to find out what my guests think you should know as we head into this week. Van Jones of Rebuild the Dream.
That's good. Well, obviously we're going into the convention this week, so I'm going to be talking about politics. But totally outside of politics, this week tickets go on sale in Chicago, September 24th, for Prince's concert. Prince has not been to Chicago for almost a decade. He's going, and he's in partnership with Rebuild the Dream. It's not about politics. He wants to bring some positivity. He says it's time to start rebuilding these communities from the ground up. It's going to be very exciting to see Prince put on a show in Chicago. He's been there for almost a decade, and he's going to do it in partnership with Rebuild the Dream.
Sounds great.
Dancing.
Rose.
The Republican Party should know, especially the Republicans who spoke at the convention last week, that immigrants did not arrive to an empty country. Native Americans are never talked about. You should also know tomorrow on Labor Day, the California Domestic Workers Bill of Rights was passed in California, which would give 200,000 mostly women and immigrants basic rights, overtime pay. They can sleep if they are live-ins, things that we all take for granted. The Farm Workers Safety Act also passed. It allows workers to sue employees who fail to provide clean drinking water and shade only when it hits 85 degrees. I don't know what happens when it's 83. I guess you have to put on a hat. But California, these bills are on the desk of California Governor Jerry Brown.
They passed out of both houses.
Yes, if you live there, call him. Get these bills passed.
Yes.
You should compare the actual platforms of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I think there were a lot of platitudes last week, but if you actually want to see where the Republican Party stands on how to build jobs or not, or the rights of women or not, you should actually look at their platform. And I hope all viewers will actually compare the platforms of the two parties.
We spent a lot of time last week when we were doing this show for the Republican convention, previewing the Republican convention, talking about the platform, because it was fascinating to see what happened, which was that the platform came out, it started to leak, and all the Republicans, high-profile, rushed to the microphones to say, we have nothing to do with it. Right. Platform, what are you talking about? This is the manifesto document in text saying what the modern Republican Party stands for. And the thing that I've been hammering home on is with the House caucus the way it is, and with the way the modern Republican Party, which functions as a very disciplined parliamentary body, there is no separation between what the candidate says
and do you think
what
Mitt
the party
Romney's going to
wants.
veto what the House Republicans want on any issue? No, absolutely not. Not with Paul Ryan as his vice presidential candidate. But, there's a lot of talk about women, lots of homage to their mothers and sisters and daughters. But when the rubber meets the road, the Republican Party has a backwards view of women's
In fact,
rights.
they officially endorsed 14th Amendment due process protections for fetuses, and they also endorsed cutting off federal funds to universities that allow undocumented students to enroll in state tuition, which would mean the entire, for instance, University of Texas system would be cut off from federal funds. That is in the Republican platform. Every voter should know that.
And no exceptions for rape or incest.
John Nichols.
You should know that our president, in an online conversation last week, basically embraced a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. This is an incredible thing. Very rarely does a president call for a constitutional amendment, or at least even begin the conversation. It's a fantastic thing. I'm very proud of Barack Obama to do it. It is the extension of his calling out of the Supreme Court during his State of the Union address as regards Citizens United. I hope he will mention it in his speech to the convention, and I hope that the Democratic Party will embrace this, because at the end of the day, if we want to talk seriously about money in politics, we're going to have to amend our Constitution to say free speech is for people, not corporations.
There's a tremendous grassroots energy around opposition to Citizens United. I'm always struck when I talk to people how much it looms. And one of the things I think that's been a little lost as we talk about the super PAC era is that most of the money now, super PACs were in the primaries, it's all shifting to the dark money now. So at least the super PACs have reporting requirements. I mean, the reason we know how much money Sheldon Adelson, for instance, gave to Newt Gingrich's super PAC is super PACs have to report. The operation Karl Rove is running, we have no idea. I want to thank my guests today, Van Jones from Rebuild the Dream, radio host Rose Aguilar, Neera Tanden from the Center for American Progress, and John Nichols, my colleague at The Nation. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 8 Eastern Time, with our coverage of this week's Democratic National Convention. I'll be part of MSNBC's DNC coverage this week, Tuesday through Thursday, from 7 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And